The cowboy's baby cried all night, until the woman next door crossed the fence and changed everything. Wyoming Territory, winter 1885. Snow lay soft upon rooftops and wire fences, a thin blanket of white fading into the gray sky. The wind cut across the plains with a surgical cold, rattling shutters, whistling through cracks in wood. In the hush of the countryside, the night felt endless, and the silence of stars was broken only by the anguished cries of an infant. Inside the small wooden house at the edge of Colt McCrea's new property, he sat in the dim lamplight, holding his baby to his chest. The oil lamp cast trembling shadows across the walls, revealing his gaunt face, drawn from nights without sleep, and eyes red with exhaustion. Colt, 30 years old, was a widower who had moved here only weeks before, to settle into a life he thought would keep him busy enough to forget. His wife had died giving birth to their daughter, leaving him with a newborn so fragile and raw in grief. He had no practice caring for a child. And now, night after night, the baby cried, piercing, unrelenting, refusing the goat's milk bottle Colt held to her lips again and again. She would not drink. He rocked her back and forth, whispering half-formed pleas. "Please, my love, just one sip." But his hands trembled, his voice cracked, and she merely kicked, screamed, and back-arched. The pressure buried him, the fear of failing her, the sorrow of losing the mother he still loved, the doubt that he could be a father at all. He stood, pacing the narrow room, lurching toward the cradle, only to collapse back into his chair with the child still wailing in his arms. He tried burying his face against her. He tried pacing to the window. Nothing soothed her. In the next-door cabin, May Ellis lay awake near her window, listening. The baby's cries tore at her chest like a blade. 2 years earlier, she had lost her own son, born alive but only breathing for 4 days. Her husband died soon after, in a horse accident. She had shut away the whispers of motherhood, teaching her heart to survive without holding a child again. She had turned away from every nursery she passed, every lullaby she heard. But tonight, she was not quiet. She rose and approached her small dresser. With trembling fingers, she opened her old wooden chest. She withdrew the faded, worn blanket that had swaddled her son. She held it close, inhaled its faint musk of mothballs and memory. Tears pricked at her eyes. She sat by the window, clutching that cloth, feeling the pain of her past, yet hearing the new sound that yanked her from sleep. The infant's wails hammered through the night, louder, more desperate. May felt each pitch strike her like a memory she could not outrun. Her ribs tightened, her heart pounded. 2 years she had lived without the risk of loving again. But the noise was unbearable. She could not stay passive. She draped her cloak over her shoulders and took the battered hurricane lamp. Her hands shook, her breath caught in her throat. She stepped out into the snow, footsteps muffled by the powder. She moved deliberately to the fence that separated her place from Colt's. Snowflakes swirled. She steadied the lamp higher, cast its glow in front of her. She hesitated, breath forming small clouds in the cold. She did not knock. She pushed the gate open with one finger and slipped through. Inside Colt's home, the crying erupted stronger. He turned sharply at the sound of the door moving. He froze. Child cradled to him. A woman entered, lamp in hand. The floorboards groaned beneath her boots, soft but real. She did not hesitate. She walked forward toward him, her face pale in lamplight, eyes firm. She extended a hand, not in accusation but in offering. The baby's wails broke into shudders. May stepped close, touched his arm gently. Colt swallowed, astonished. He made no move to refuse. She made no demand. She looked down at the child, then placed the blanket from her chest over the baby's shoulders. She knelt on the floor close to him. Her voice, cracked and soft, began to sing, "You're safe, little one. I've waited a long time to hold you, even if you're not mine." She sang slowly, reverently. Tears streaked down her cheeks. Each note trembled with longing and sorrow, but also hope. The child's sobs quieted, the wails tapered. The infant, exhausted, nestled into May's arms. Colt watched, frozen. The hush that followed felt like wonder. The baby's breaths slowed. May rocked gently, singing the lullaby she once sang to her own son, breathing life back into her heart as she cradled this child who was not hers by birth. In that silence, she drew the child close. She sang again, her tears falling into the hair at his cheek. Colt remained behind her, bowed in awe and pain and awe. He did not step forward. He dared not break that fragile peace. And May, her voice little but certain, rocked him through the night, her arms healing, her heart trembling, the child's breathing solidifying, and the brokenness between them beginning to stitch. The sky hung low, heavy with pale clouds. The morning light barely broke through as May Ellis stepped through her front door, her shawl drawn tight across her shoulders. Her boots crunched over frost-bitten earth as she made her way back to her cabin, the same path she had walked in the dark only hours before. Her hands smelled faintly of milk and wood smoke, and of the baby. Inside her kitchen, the warmth from the old stove had gone out. She didn't bother to relight it. The silence now pressed in all around her, thicker somehow than before. May stood for a long time at the edge of her table, palms flat against the wood. She could still feel the weight of the baby girl in her arms, the soft warmth of her cheek, the way her tiny fingers had clutched May's worn collar as if they had known each other far longer than a single night. She did not cry, but her chest felt hollow, like something sacred had been placed inside for a moment, then quietly taken away. As she turned to go wash the tin cup she'd used the night before, something caught her eye through the frost-bitten glass of the window. A small jar sat on the porch. Inside it, a bundle of wildflowers, winter daisies, white and trembling, and folded against the glass, a note. May stepped out, barefoot now, the cold stinging against the wood as she bent to lift the jar with both hands. Her fingers fumbled with the paper. "Thank you, for saving us both." The handwriting was sharp, hurried, a man not used to expressing softness, but trying. Her throat tightened. She clutched the note to her chest as if it might fade away if she didn't hold on tight enough. Not widow. Not poor May. Not the woman who lost everything. Someone who saved them both. She whispered to the empty air. "No one's ever said that to me before." That evening, when dusk settled across the prairie like a wool blanket, May sat in her rocking chair by the window. The old baby blanket she once kept, buried at the bottom of her hope chest, now folded neatly across her lap. The baby didn't cry that night. Not once. But May still sat there, rocking, listening. Part of her hoped the silence would hold. The other part missed the sound. She stared out into the darkness beyond the fence. She imagined the little girl asleep, chest rising slow and steady, and Colt McCrea, exhausted, watching over her. May closed her eyes. Her hand slid over the note on her lap, her thumb brushing over the word, us. She whispered, so softly it barely left her lips, "I'm still here." Though she hadn't been invited. Though this wasn't her family. She had crossed the fence once. But now, the fence no longer felt like a line. It felt like a thread, stretched between one quiet heart and another. The days that followed came with no schedule, no promises. Just the sound of footsteps over thawing dirt, and the quiet creak of the back fence as May Ellis began to appear, unannounced, uninvited, but never unwelcome. Colt McCrea never asked why she came. He only opened the door when she knocked, and sometimes when she didn't. May carried no airs about her, just soft, steady hands and the knowledge born from loss. She did not fuss, she did not scold, she simply showed him how to hold the child without fear. "You don't need to be strong," she said once, shifting the baby in his arms, "just steady." She taught him to support the baby's neck with a cupped hand, not too firm, not too loose. To warm milk by placing the bottle in a pan of hot water instead of holding it over flame. "Too much heat takes the sweetness away," she murmured. "Let it rise slow." Colt listened. He fumbled. Yes, but he listened. Sometimes he watched May more than the child, his brow furrowed, trying to memorize how her fingers moved, how her touch seemed to ease even the tensest whimper. One afternoon, the baby let out a cry after her nap, small, tight, urgent. Colt reached for a cloth to dab her eyes. "Wait," May said, gently catching his wrist. "Use this." She turned his hand and guided the soft skin of his knuckle beneath the baby's tear-soaked cheek. "It's warmer," she explained. "Kinder." The baby cooed. Colt blinked. Then, slowly, awkwardly, he smiled. A real one. Not forced, not polite. Something in him unknotted, just for a moment. From outside, the neighbors saw the change. And they whispered, "Widow Ellis, spending a lot of time next door. She's not just rocking that baby, she's replacing someone. Does he even remember his wife's face?" The words traveled like dust, light but clinging. May heard them. She felt them in the way some women looked away when she passed through the town square, or the way the shopkeeper hesitated before asking if she still needed milk. She said nothing. And she kept going. Until one late afternoon, she didn't. The baby cried through lunch, but May didn't appear. Colt paced the yard, checked the fence, then glanced at the curtain of her cabin window. Still. No smoke from her chimney. He waited until night, then again at dawn. By the second afternoon, he filled a pot with water, set a chicken to boil, added carrots, onions, thyme. Too much thyme. He knew it, but he wasn't sure how to fix it. So he carried the heavy pot, still warm, across the fence, and left it at her door with a folded note. "I remembered you like thyme. I may have used too much." He didn't knock. He walked away. Inside, May lifted the lid of the pot, and the scent hit her like memory. Carrots soft, broth cloudy, a bit too herbal. Like her mother used to make. Like home. She sat at her table, spoon untouched, eyes wet. She didn't cry for the soup. She cried because someone had remembered. Not just her name, not just her past, but her taste. And it had been a long, long time since anyone had cooked for her. The next morning, Colt found an old rocking chair on his porch. The wood had been sanded smooth, its joints re-nailed, its paint freshened with care but not extravagance. A worn quilt rested over its back, faded blue, patched with little squares of flannel and cotton. No note, no explanation. But he knew. He carried it inside like it was something fragile, sacred, set it near the hearth where the baby often cried between dusk and sleep. That evening the wind picked up again. The baby's fussing started just after supper, small noises at first, but growing. She squirmed in his arms, fists curled tight, face scrunched in discomfort. Colt looked at the chair, then back at the child. He hesitated, but then he Saturday. The chair creaked beneath his weight, steady and slow. He shifted the baby gently, cradled her against his chest the way May had shown him, with one arm under her legs, the other wrapped across her back. He began to rock. Not fast, not certain. Just enough. At first, she squirmed, then stilled. The fire crackled low. Shadows danced on the walls. Colt cleared his throat. And then, softly, almost shyly, he began to hum. No melody in particular, just fragments of tune he remembered from long ago, something his mother sang when he was too sick to get out of bed. It was rough, halting, not quite music. But the baby listened. Her breathing slowed. Her little hand uncurled and rested on his chest, just above his heart. Colt kept rocking. He tried words, fumbled through the first verse of an old lullaby. "Sleep, little darlin', the stars are all high." His voice cracked. He stopped. Started again. "Papa's still near, though the wind howls and sighs." Behind the door, May stood. She had come to check in, basket of folded baby clothes in her arms. She hadn't meant to stay. But when she heard the singing, she froze. And then leaned in. She didn't knock, didn't speak. She listened. The sound of Colt's low, rasped lullaby drifted through the wooden walls, through her chest, into the places she thought had long gone cold. And then, so sudden it caught even Colt off guard, the baby laughed. A soft, bubbling giggle, like the bell of spring water. He looked down. She was looking up at him, smiling. Colt blinked hard, swallowed, and turned his face just slightly, away from the firelight. But May saw. Even from the porch she saw. And her own tears rose, not from sadness this time, but from something breaking open inside her, and light coming through. She pressed her hand to the doorframe, breathing carefully. Inside, Colt rocked slower now. He wasn't afraid to hold her anymore. He wasn't afraid of getting it wrong. He was just there, with her. And for a flicker of time, the house felt whole. A man who had lost everything. A child who had never known her mother. And a woman who had once buried her heart alongside a tiny wooden cradle. 3 lives, stitched by nothing but moments and silence, and a second-hand rocking chair. But from that night on, it was enough. The gossip started like prairie fire, quiet at first, then everywhere. It drifted from the feed store to the church pews, from sewing circles to the saloon bar, slipping between lips like wind through fence posts. By the end of the week, it had reached every dusty corner of town. "Widow Ellis," they murmured, eyes narrowed behind teacups and whiskey glasses, "goes to Colt McCrea's house every night and doesn't come back until morning. A man just buried his wife, and now there's a woman rocking his baby? They say she sleeps in the old nursery." No one asked Colt. No one asked May. But that didn't stop the talk from growing teeth. And then, one Sunday afternoon, the storm took human form. A woman arrived at Colt's ranch in a high-wheeled buggy, drawn by a glossy chestnut mare. Her hat was pinned too tightly, her riding coat buttoned to the neck, and her gloves were too clean for the dirt road she'd come down. Margaret Holloway, cousin to Colt's late wife, the kind of woman who didn't believe in questions when accusations would do. She stepped down from the buggy like it offended her and stared Colt down before he even had a chance to open the door. "I came," she snapped, "because word is, you've replaced your wife before her grave has even settled." Colt stood in the doorway, blocking most of the room behind him. His expression was unreadable, but his jaw ticked. Margaret's sharp gaze slid past him anyway, catching the little quilt draped over the rocking chair by the fire, the half-washed bottles in the basin, the extra shawl on the hook. "Who's been living here?" she demanded. "No one's living here but me and the baby," Colt said, voice level but cool. "Then why is the whole town saying a stranger's mothering your daughter?" He didn't answer. His silence was louder than a denial. Margaret stepped forward, not bothering to hide the sneer on her face. "You think that woman can raise a child? A widow with no husband, no child of her own? You're letting grief blind you. That baby needs real family, stability, respectability." Colt's eyes darkened. "That baby," he said softly, "needs someone who comes when she cries." Margaret scoffed. "You're embarrassing yourself." May never heard those words, but she felt them. That evening, she didn't come. Not the next night either. The little fence between their homes, once a place of shared glances and quiet kindness, now felt tall as a prison wall. Inside her cabin, May sat by her cold stove, hands locked together in her lap. Her eyes stayed on the empty chair across the room. The fire crackled, but offered no warmth. She thought of Colt, of the baby, of the laughter in the rocking chair, and how it had felt to belong, even just a little while. Maybe it had been a mistake. Maybe kindness only counted when it didn't overstep. And then the baby's crying rose through the dark. Higher. Harder. Colt tried. She knew he did. She could picture him pacing, bouncing her in tired arms. But the crying didn't stop. And when it broke into a desperate, gasping wail, May cried too. For the first time in years. Not out of grief, but something raw, something like longing. The next morning, just after dawn, a knock shook her door. She hesitated, then opened. There stood Colt, hair tousled, eyes rimmed red with exhaustion. His baby lay against his chest, face tear-streaked, fists balled. Behind him, A few neighbors watched from a distance, unsure, curious. No one spoke. Until Colt did. "If this baby grows up knowing what kindness looks like," he said quietly, but with the force of truth, "it's because she saw you, not me." May's lips parted, but no sound came. Colt stepped forward, not inside, but far enough. "She doesn't need just anyone," he said. "She needs you, we both do." And for the first time in her life, May Ellis did not feel like a burden or a shadow of someone better. She felt chosen. And her tears fell, not from hurt, but from something gentler, something she hadn't felt since she last held her own baby. She wept because someone had seen her and stayed. The storm came in fast. By late afternoon, the skies had turned the color of old tin, and the wind whipped over the plains like a scream too long held in. Trees bent, rain slashed sideways, and the dirt road between the cabins turned to rivers of mud. Colt was tying down the chicken coop door when he saw it. May, running through the wind, her shawl soaked, her skirt plastered to her legs. She had been trying to catch the chickens before they scattered. Then she slipped. Colt didn't think. He dropped the rope, vaulted the low fence, and rushed to her. Mud splashed up to his knees, rain battered his shoulders, but he reached her in time, just as she tried to get up, wincing. "I'm fine," she muttered through clenched teeth, but her ankle twisted when she moved. He didn't answer. Just lifted her gently into his arms. She didn't fight him. Didn't protest. The thunder rolled over them as he carried her through the downpour, one arm under her knees, the other around her back. Her hands gripped his shirt, trembling. Inside his house, he placed her down on the old kitchen chair beside the stove. The fire inside had gone low, so he stoked it quickly, fed it wood until it crackled warm again. May sat silently, teeth clenched from the pain in her ankle, hair dripping, eyes avoiding his. "I told you I'm all right," she whispered. "I know," Colt said, "but you don't have to be." She looked up at him, really looked. And for the first time, there was no guarded distance between them, no shadow of "should I be here?" Just the raw hum of something slowly building, like heat from coals that had burned all along. Then came a soft rustle on the floor. His daughter. The baby had crawled from the crib, unsteady but determined, her little hands patting against the wooden planks until she reached May's feet. She looked up and climbed right into May's lap. May froze. Then her arms, almost by instinct, wrapped around the small body. The girl settled instantly, head resting against May's thigh. A soft coo escaped her lips. Outside, rain still pounded. But inside, everything stilled. May's voice broke the silence. Not a sentence, not a word. A melody. Low, slow, almost too soft to hear. A lullaby older than memory, sung in a voice rough from emotion, but clear with care. She ran her fingers through the baby's damp hair, the song wrapping around the two of them like a blanket. Colt stood by the stove, watching. He couldn't move. Not when the house, his house, had never looked more like home. Not when the woman he'd never meant to let in had become the only warmth that mattered. May kept singing, unaware of the tears slipping down her own cheeks. Not from pain, but from something even deeper, recognition. The quiet, breathtaking truth that she belonged somewhere again. When the song ended, she looked up and met Colt's gaze. He stepped forward slowly, then knelt, one hand on the floor, one on her chair. "You keep the whole house warm just by being here," he whispered. May didn't answer. She didn't need to, because that night the storm kept raging outside, but inside, for the first time in years, no one cried. The morning after the storm was quiet. Mist hung low over the grass like breath not yet released. The barn creaked as the sun tried to rise, and the air smelled of wet earth, wood smoke, and something softer, like cinnamon and worn cotton. Inside the cabin, warmth still lingered from the night before. The fire in the hearth had burned low, but its embers glowed faintly, casting a hush over the kitchen like a lullaby that had not quite ended. May stood at the table, wiping it down with careful, slow strokes. Her ankle throbbed, but the swelling had eased. Each movement was deliberate, as if she was touching not just the wood, but the life that had unfolded in this room, quietly, without permission, yet wholly welcome. She folded the blanket she'd used, ran her fingers over the stitching she'd done by hand years ago. The baby's shawl lay on the arm of the rocking chair, still smelling faintly of milk and sleep. May lifted it, pressed it to her face for just a second, then smoothed it and set it back down. She'd made coffee at first light, half a pot now cooling on the stove. 2 slices of cornbread sat on a plate, one for Colt, one she'd take for the walk home, maybe. The child was still asleep, curled like a bean in the cradle, fists tucked under her chin. Her breath came easy, steady, peaceful. May watched her, fingertips hovering over the edge of the cradle, not daring to touch. Then she turned toward the door. It was time to go. That was what she had told herself. She had stepped into this life to help, to ease the ache of a crying child. But help was not the same as staying. Staying was something else entirely. The door creaked gently as she opened it. Fog pressed softly against the world outside, blurring fences and treetops into dreamlike shapes. The ground beneath her boots was still wet, the air cool, fresh, raw. She reached the fence line just as a shadow stepped through the mist. Colt. He was still in the same coat from the night before, damp at the hem, boots thick with mud, his hair was mussed, jaw rough with stubble. He held the baby to his chest like she was the last warm thing in the world worth holding onto. The girl was awake now, fingers curled around her father's collar, eyes bright, making quiet little sounds like the morning itself. For a long moment, they said nothing. Then Colt spoke, voice steady but soft. "She already thinks you're her mother," he said. "Maybe we should let her be right." May's breath caught in her throat. There was no ring, no flowers, no rehearsed words, just a man with calloused hands and tired eyes, offering her something more lasting than anything wrapped in lace, something earned. He took a breath. "I don't have a lot," he continued. "But I know how to build things slow. I know how to make stew from nothing. I know how to fix what's busted. And I'm learning how to hold her right. I could learn to hold you too, if you'll let me." May looked down at her hands, red from scrubbing, knuckles nicked. Her skirt was damp, shoes streaked with mud. She thought of the nights she'd sat awake, listening to a child cry behind thin walls. Of the tiny scarf she had kept folded in the drawer, of how this child had curled into her chest like it had always been home. She looked back at him, and he didn't look away. Her steps were slow, but steady. She reached across the fence, touching the baby's hand first, then Colt's. She didn't say a word, but after a long moment she nodded, just once. No smile, no music swelled, just a yes, quiet and true. And in the soft fog of that Wyoming morning, with no one to witness but the wind, a family began. Not with a kiss, not with a ring, but with a shared silence. And a baby who finally smiled. 1 year later, the winds in Wyoming still howled across the plains. But in the back of Colt McCrea's modest homestead, something new had taken root. A small wooden sign above a low gate, carved by hand, read, "The Kind Hearth." It was not a grand place, just a warm one. Every Tuesday and Friday, children from nearby farms and ranches came to sit on patchwork quilts, eat honey cornbread, and listen to stories told beside the fire. Some stories were about brave horses, others about prairie girls who outsmarted coyotes, and some were just about soup. May Ellis sat with them, apron dusted in flour, hair tied back, her voice gentle and clear. The rocking chair she once fixed for Colt now creaked beneath her as little heads leaned into her lap. Her daughter, yes, her daughter, often sat closest. A year older now, all curls and questions. She had started calling May Mama weeks after that morning fog, and never once stopped. At night, when the house was quiet and the coals in the hearth glowed low, May would write in a journal she kept hidden in a drawer. It was addressed not to the world, but to the girl who had cried her way into her life. That evening she wrote, "You cried every night, and I crossed the fence not because I knew what to do, but because I couldn't bear hearing pain and doing nothing. Love isn't always loud. Sometimes it sounds like soup left at your door, or a man holding your hand when you pretend to be strong. One day, you will be grown, and this world might try to tell you that kindness is weakness, or that silence means nothing. But you will know better. You will know it's not the loudest voice that heals, it's the warmest one." She paused. Outside, a giggle rang out. The girl was still awake, peeking through the curtain at the stars. May smiled. She closed the journal, slipped it into the drawer, and crossed the room barefoot. As she opened the door, the cold breeze of the plains rolled in, but so did the sound of joy, laughter. Little boots pattering across the porch. Colt stood nearby, leaning against the post, cup of coffee in hand. He caught her eye and nodded. Just once. No words needed. May lifted her voice again, the same lullaby she had once sung to a crying child in a kitchen full of stormlight. Now, it rose in the air not as a balm for sorrow, but as a hymn of belonging. The girl twirled on the porch, the other children joining in. And May Ellis, once a woman who had lost everything, now had everything she never dared to ask for. A child, a home, a place to belong. And from that house with the kind hearth, her voice would keep rising, soft, steady, and full of all the love that crossed a fence, one stormy night, and never looked back. If this story touched your heart, if you've ever loved quietly, carried your pain in silence, or found warmth in the smallest act of kindness, then the kind hearth was made for you too. This wasn't just a tale about a baby who stopped crying, or a woman who crossed a fence. It was about love, the kind that doesn't knock, but simply waits for someone brave enough to listen. If you believe in quiet strength, second chances, and the kind of love that grows not with grand gestures but with steady presence, hit that hype button, subscribe to Wild West Love Stories, and stay with us for more tales where love doesn't shout, but it still changes everything. Thank you for listening.